Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. So this is the third panel of the day, and it's the technology panel. And the goal of this panel is to show how lawyers and practitioners and people from other fields have worked together to use technology to really advance the interests of the most poor people in the United States and also across the world. So the three panelists that we have with us today, first, Robert Fidel, and he's with the One Laptop Per Child Foundation. We have Heather Thorne-Matthews, and she's with the Grameen Foundation. And we have Claudia Johnson, and she is with probono.net. And I could go on and on about them, but I think it would be better to hear that from themselves. So we're just going to start right now with Robert.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks for inviting OLPC to be part of the symposium. It's an honor. It's a great tradition. One Laptop Per Child emerged out of the MIT Media Lab in 2005 as a nonprofit, and it was drawing on about 30 years of research on children using technology in different parts of the world, but was basically premised on the idea that if you give a child the means of their own learning, they'll start thinking differently about it. And more specifically, when anybody really programs a computer, when they go through the process of programming and debugging, they think about their learning process in a very different way, in a critical way. They're learning about learning. And the principles of OLPC, Nicholas Negroponte, Seymour Papert, and others, premised that the missing link in this whole thing was how to get every child their own laptop. And we realized that you needed a fair amount of research and development and creative thinking so that OLPC as a nonprofit could do what the market alone would not do. If you give a kid a laptop, can you end poverty? This is not a cliffhanger. There's no surprise answer here. And if you're hesitating about answering yes, just substitute the word laptop with education. And I think it becomes quite clear what the benefits of giving every child a laptop is. If I was going to update OLPC's mission 5 years out, I'd focus on this number, which is 75 million, which is an approximation of the number of children in the world who do not have access to school on a daily basis. Millennium Development Goal 2. Quite a number of people believe that this number is actually low, dramatically low, maybe by a factor of 2. And this doesn't even get into discussion about the number of kids who have access to education, but access to education means sharing a classroom with 60, 80, 150, 200 classmates. The relevance of the material that they learn on a daily basis, the harassment that they might be facing going to school, whether because of gender, religion, or other issues. So really just access isn't enough. We need to figure out a way to provide every child in the world a quality, relevant education. And if you really think about it, whatever this number is, 75 million, 100 million, 40% of those children are living in areas where there's conflict or post-conflict or a cycle. So thinking about getting schools built, training teachers, qualifying a mentoring cohort to support those children, it's not going to happen in the traditional way. We don't want to isolate traditional ways of learning in any community, but we want to enable it. We want to give children a way to become competitive, to be able to compete in this century, and in turn help stabilize and improve the futures of their own communities. So OLPC really was about lowering barriers. And there were 3 barriers that we really identified. One was price, the other was technology itself, and the other was infrastructure. And I'm really bad because I have an XO in my bag and I haven't taken it out, but I will. If you've bought more than one laptop in the past 5 years, you know what the price has happened to the price of laptops. When OLPC launched at about $200 in 2007, $200 was about a third to a fourth of the price of your regular laptops. And now with the emerging netbook market, or the emerged netbook market, and now the tablet, I think OPC can be credited in some way of putting pressure on industry to lower the price. Technology had to evolve. We needed robust laptops. We needed to think about power in a different way. So we got rid of things like the traditional hard drive, the fan. The display had to be dual use, so kids could use it outside of their traditional classrooms, because sometimes a classroom does not mean a building, it means under a tree. And we really had to think about infrastructure. These kids are living off the grid. Can it be powered by solar? Can we provide another way for these kids to collaborate and communicate? So yes, the kids can communicate between themselves just with their exos without thinking about having to connect to an access point or the internet itself. OPC had to knit together some pretty broad partnerships, and you can see some of them represented here. It's kind of shocking to see actually some of these companies aren't around. I think I'm missing a couple of slides. Sadly, the one image that's missing is Foley Hoag, who the law firm has been a huge supporter of OPC since the very beginning. But between these companies, OPC accumulated about $50 million in startup funding to provide children with the research that went into laptops, to provide a seeding of laptops for projects around the world. But it really came down to negotiating through a set of different interests that each of these organizations had, finding the common goals that we shared, and figuring out how we share sort of the fruits of those labors. And if there's one thing that we really learned here, is that the best partnerships are not based on transactional gain, but they're actually based on common principles. Once you agree on the principles, you'll really find the transaction that advances the intersection of the missions, but basing it just on a financial exchange really isn't going to get it done. Right now, OPC and XOs are present in 45 countries. There's about 2 million XOs around the world. And it is working in a rather saturated manner. We're really quite serious when we say one laptop per child, because we want every child in the community to have their own machine that they use at home, they use at school. We want their classmates to all have one, because school doesn't always happen at the prescribed time and place. And sometimes school is double shift, and 2, 3, 4 hours of education isn't enough for an inspired child. And we believe that technology can inspire those children to learn anywhere. And it doesn't have to be a fixed curriculum, but it can be their opportunity to explore. You see some pictures from around the world in the different places we are and have been. One case I want to talk to you about is a project that I spent about a year working on, which was getting laptops to Palestinian refugees in Gaza. And it's something of a journey that I'll probably remember for the rest of my days, in that it took 18 months to get a couple of thousand laptops 110 miles. And it's a testament not only to how difficult bureaucracies and regulations can be to negotiate, but also thinking about the different interests and how children in conflict have to deal with limitations to resource and infrastructure that allow them to learn. The one thing that we learned through this process was that there's many ways to get something done. There's the formal process and there's the informal process. So we brought together quite a group of governments, NGOs, commercial freight companies, and a bunch of really psyched kids at the end of the day. The program is through the UN agency that administers to the Palestinian refugees in Gaza. We're working on a similar program with them in the West Bank as well. I think what really talks about the success of this program is it's not an imposed program. It's something that is built out of collaboration, identifying the common goals, not only that OPC and the UN agency that administers the school has, how they're targeting technology as a way to improve the education that the children are receiving, particularly because it's a school system that's in decline, remedial education is on the increase. but thinking about what this means to the community. Designing to be OLPC has a couple of principles that we really focus on. Child ownership, low ages, we like to start at 6 and go up, 6 years and old. Saturation, again, define your community and give every child a laptop because children learn from each other. Connectivity, so much as it's possible, let's find a solution. If it's present, let's get the kids online, let them share their stories, let them access a world of information. And free and open source. OLPC as an organization has a commitment to making the machine as transparent and as open as possible, not only so the kids can explore it and break it, but that local development can happen. Because the context is complicated. We're not looking to leave the community behind. We want them to be engaged. We don't want to leave teachers behind. It changes the way teachers teach. Again, I'm missing a picture there, but it works. It changes the classroom. It goes from all eyes forward to collaboration. You saw in the former slide, this was a teacher who used to teach all eyes forward, and now he's sitting on the floor with his students exploring information and how a laptop can tell stories, tell lessons differently. Kids take them home. They use them outside. It's low power, so solar works. As much as we like to identify those 5 principles as the way to make OLPC successful, you can only put so much in a contract and requirement. Because at the end of the day, we want a warranty program that isn't violated if the kid has to repair their own laptop, and that does happen. If people want to find different ways to power the laptop because they're off their grid, it's an example from Afghanistan where they attached a laptop to a sewing machine to power it. And we're not concerned about copyright and trademark. We want it for defensive purposes, but at the end of the day, we want it to be appropriated, improved upon, and shared with the rest of the world. That's a cake in the shape of an XO that was made for celebration in Gaza. What can you do? Well, there's a lot you can do. And first and foremost, I think really honoring the ethos of the pro bono ethos and practice of the legal community is fantastic. And the honest truth is if every professional community had that same ethos, the world would be a better place just by doing that. But advocate for education and development. Be your client's partner's attorney. In other words, when we're writing agreements and thinking about negotiations, we make every clause mutual. We don't start off by thinking about gotchas and things of that nature. Formal and informal process, be thinking about how regulation impacts the nonprofit community, particularly with export control licenses and technology. The patent process and trademarking process is an onerous and expensive thing for nonprofits to deal with, but it's something we need to do in order to be able to continue our mission, particularly in a defensive notion. And just the bottom line is an appeal to use simple language in contracts. It makes it easier when we have to translate it, and it eliminates that hurdle and that intimidation factor, particularly when you're doing agreements and contracts around the world. Thank you very much.
So next we have Heather with the Grameen Foundation.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this panel. It's great to be able to introduce the technology component to the discussion about poverty. So I'm Heather Thorne from Grameen Foundation, and for those who don't know Grameen Foundation, we're not Grameen Bank. We have been around for almost 15 years. We received a grant actually from Muhammad Yunus about 15 years ago to take some of the models that had been pioneered in Bangladesh around poverty alleviation related to micro-franchise with village phone women or with microfinance and see what could really be replicated and scaled around the world. And so we are a separate organization. We share that same heritage and that same name, but we are focused on poverty alleviation. And technology is the area that I focus in. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the role that we see technology playing in poverty alleviation. So I think it's helpful to just start with kind of what do we know about poverty? What are some key themes that are really important in this discussion? I think what you see from some of these stats here is that agriculture is very important. Rural populations are important. we talk a lot about women and think about kind of the impacts on women of poverty. That in the context of agriculture, there's really a growing crisis around food security and what that means for the global economy, but then also what it means for agriculture in Africa. A lot of the green revolution that happened over the past 20 years in Asia and other parts of the world didn't really reach Africa, and so there's a lot of pressure on Africa to increase its food production. And then lastly, when you think about that challenge of population, there are a lot of things that really have to be done to address population growth and the impacts of that population on poverty and food security. But one of the really important levers is women having access to education and livelihood opportunities. So those are some themes that will permeate the rest of what I'll talk about. So just sort of, when we think about building solutions to address poverty, it's really important to keep in mind some of the kind of known poverty traps, things that keep people in poverty. And some of those really are around, making sure that there are opportunities for people to have a livelihood, especially for women. Enabling the poor to invest in productive assets. So instead of spending every penny they have on just basic survival, giving them the opportunity to be able to invest in a cow or a chicken or a mobile phone, for example, but having that opportunity. Addressing issues of infant mortality and nutrition that really address sort of the long-term ability of that person and their family to have livelihoods. And then providing financial services, financial products that are targeted to their specific needs and challenges. Education, as Robert talked about, and then access to markets and basic services in rural areas. So those are sort of the root causes or root issues that really kind of either drive poverty or keep people in poverty. So when we think about building technology solutions, we really want to make sure that they're grounded in an understanding of what those challenges are. So enter the mobile phone. This is what mobile phone penetration looked like in approximately 2001, and the dark countries are the ones that had the highest penetration. Go forward to 2004, and you see that Russia started to become much more heavily permeated. By 2009, South America and even sub-Saharan Africa. And what this stat doesn't actually show is the use of mobile phones in a shared use scenario, so the numbers are actually even higher than this. So there's a ton of potential to reach poor people around the world in a way that was never really possible before, and technology really does open up that door and can contribute to a lot of solutions. So I won't go through all the details here, but this is kind of a high-level summary of the different ways that mobile phones can really address the needs of the poor, around reducing costs, around providing access to important information that the poor might not otherwise have access to, and then around creating a productive asset that a person can use as the basis for a business. Just one interesting statistic on the reduced cost piece, CGAP, I believe it's a World Bank organization, consultative group on, I'm forgetting what it stands for, but focuses on financial issues for the poor. They did a study that shows that, looking for the number here, by lowering transaction costs related to reducing time and travel for the poor, it actually increases the disposable income on average by 5 to 30%. So when you think about where the rubber hits the road, where does a phone really play a role? It really is helping people to actually do things more efficiently, get information or services that they need, or form the basis of a small business. So, the phones that you see in the hands of a lot of people where we work in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia tend to oftentimes be these very simple $15 phones that can really just do voice or SMS. But now there's $100 Androids in Kenya. And, a lot of the Chinese manufacturers are starting to really compete in this space and push down the prices. And so there's an interesting opportunity to say, what more can you do if you have technology that can provide even richer information, location, video, other things like that. So there is an incredible opportunity to reach people, but technology is not the silver bullet. It's just a tool. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, but just to put it up there because I think it's an interesting way to frame the way we think about poverty alleviation at Grameen Foundation and sort of the way we address it, which is that you have a series of inputs that allow you to address needs in particular domains and deliver a set of solutions where the mobile phone is really the enabler. It's the tool that flows through all of that work. So a little bit of history about Grameen Foundation. We've been working in mobile phones specifically for about 9 years. As I mentioned, we kind of started with looking at what Grameen Bank had done with the village phone model in Bangladesh and said, what would it take to scale that to other countries that have different levels of mobile penetration or that have different poverty densities, or population densities in general. So we started by taking that model and launching that in Uganda with MTN Uganda, which is a mobile operator there. And that was actually quite successful to the point where they actually bought out our share of the joint venture, and they now operate it as a division within MTN Uganda. We scaled that to Rwanda, Cameroon, and a number of other African countries. And at the time, it was really just providing voice services in the community. We tried to scale it to Indonesia, and what we learned there is that as mobile phone penetration increases, people don't need to go and pay someone in their village to use a phone. They already have access to it. So then we said, well, we actually think that there's something inherently valuable, though, about having that community intermediary in the village, not only for the village itself, but for that intermediary, who themselves are usually poor entrepreneurs. So are there other services that that entrepreneur could provide or things they could sell that would help empower poor entrepreneurs to start and run their own business with the phone? So we layered on airtime sales. Did that in Indonesia. We're continuing to do that. And then in Uganda and Indonesia, and also Ghana actually, we've now started what we call the App Lab. And that's basically building mobile services, applications and services that sit on top of the phone that the community intermediary can provide to people in their communities about health, about agriculture. Over time, we hope to do more work with education, but we're not there yet. You could think about transportation applications with the idea that you're having a first-order impact on the entrepreneur themselves, where they can earn an income, and a second-order impact on the poor people that they're reaching who don't otherwise have access to these services and information. So just wanted to share quickly, what are some learnings we've had? We've worked in this space for a while. What have we learned about what we think it takes to actually have transformational impact on the poor with technology? And I actually start with the example of M-Pesa, which is the mobile payment solution in Kenya that was not developed by a nonprofit. It was developed by a for-profit telecom operator looking to make money. But they've done a lot of things right about understanding a basic need that people, including poor people, had to just move money around. And really interesting statistic is that between 2008 and 2009, the aggregate amount of money that was transferred between people in Kenya through M-Pesa equaled 13% of Kenya's GDP. So there's a serious demand that they're actually meeting there. Now, all it does is mobile payments, and so it stops short of actually really addressing some of the potential needs that the poor have around targeted financial services. But there's a lot we can learn about what they did do right in developing other mobile services that are meant to help the poor. So first is just understand local needs deeply. And I think that this picture actually highlights 3 key principles. One, do your product development and your research in the place that you're actually trying to serve the people. On the ground, in the field, getting the best feedback you can from the users. The second is the mobile phone is not the solution. It's really enhancing other information and services that either may or may not already be available to the person. But that brochure there is agriculture information, that the phone is helping somebody to do a survey and or to look up some of that information and provide that information in context to a farmer who otherwise didn't have access to it. And the third is look for sustainable business models that can take the burden of paying for the service away from the end user. Just like none of us pay for Google searches, a farmer shouldn't have to pay to get information. So look for other entities who have an interest in providing that service to a farmer because there's some other benefit that they get from the farmer using that service. Next, tailoring solutions to unique needs. This is an example from our work in Ghana with pregnant women, where we discovered that voice is actually much more powerful, and women are much more likely to sign up for a service if they get the message in voicemails sent to their phone rather than SMSs. We also learned that we need to get the men involved, the husbands involved, because women often don't have access to the mobile phone themselves. Their husband owns the phone. Number of other factors around local language, but the point is you have to develop the solutions to be customized to the needs of the target users. Utilizing trusted intermediaries. I mentioned this before. These are people that are in the village who are given an opportunity to participate in a micro-franchise type business where they provide access to these solutions and services to their community members, and they earn a living from doing so. That helps overcome language gaps, literacy gaps, trust gaps, usability, and ownership of technology gaps. Next, the information has to be actionable. It has to be trustworthy. It has to help the poor make decisions, change behaviors. And if they don't understand the value of that information, they might not adopt it on their own. So utilizing trusted intermediaries, people they trust, can actually encourage people to try, whether it be a new farming practice or a health recommendation. Scale. Scale is important, but scale is not the only thing. You've got to measure who you're reaching, how you're impacting them. There's some important social performance management tools that allow organizations to understand, it's not just about making the solution go big as soon as you can. Understand who you're reaching and understand the impact of that solution first, and only then, and only if you have a business model that's viable, does it make sense to try to scale that model. I was going to give an example of this micro-franchise program we've got going in Indonesia, but I think my time is short, so I'll pass by it. And then finally, in the context of multidisciplinary collaboration, none of these solutions that we're developing is possible to do on our own. I think that's probably pretty clear, but we work very closely with the private sector. We work with mobile operators. We work with OEMs, technology companies, and we have to work with banks and processors and other people. But the key message is that we have to sit down at the very beginning and think about what are the incentives of each of these entities, why would they want to participate, and how can we structure and align the incentives so that everybody contributes something uniquely and derives something of value uniquely from that collaboration. So in short, I think technology has a huge opportunity to alleviate poverty. We particularly like to focus on the mobile phone in our work, but I think the important message is that technology is a tool, but it's really a very powerful tool for really understanding the needs of the people that you're serving and really trying to extend the reach of your solutions to alleviate poverty. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. And finally, we have Claudia from Pro Bono Net.
I'm short, I gotta pull this down. Thank you all. I'm very happy to be here. I graduated from law school in '97, and it was because of events of the SPARE Symposium, which we used to call the SPARE Conference, and the Public Interest Center, which is now called the Toll Center, that I became a public interest lawyer. So it's very, very good for me to be here, to see the same energy, to see the students put such a wonderful event with so much care and attention to detail, and actually to have the chance to work with the co-panelists in developing our talk. I'm gonna go fast because we wanna leave a lot of time for questions and discussion with the audience. I work with Pro Bono Net. We're a legal nonprofit based in New York and California. We've been around over 10 years, and what we do is we look for technology that is proven to increase access to justice, to support and enhance pro bono, and to work with legal aid organizations that are working with low-income people. We have 4 tools that we use, and they're mainly online forums, which is Law Help Interactive, which is the project I lead. We also do websites, and Law Help Pennsylvania is one of the websites. We work with 28 states in the statewide websites that provide a bona fide legal information for people seeking information for free. We also do web chat. It's a product that we call Live Help, which is basically if you've shopped online, you can go in and ask for help in finding good quality free legal information. And that web chat is now in many courts. It's in Ontario. It's in legal websites, helping people find the information very quickly and very effectively. And we also have a database product that we sell to big firms, which is called Pro Bono Manager, which helps big firms manage their pro bono practice more efficiently and effectively. So those are our 4 technology products. I'm gonna focus on Law Help Interactive because it's what I do every day. Basically, I work from Eastern Washington State, where the Yakima and the Snake River meet up about a mile south of the Columbia River. That's where I am. My project is all over the country. The states in purple are the states that have very solid use of online forums that are powered by Law Help Interactive. The states in purple The states in red are states that are coming in or just came in creating forms. Actually, the state of Vermont, they just put in eviction defense forms and family law forms on Law Help Interactive. And I'm going to talk about online form technology in the context of the self-represented crisis that we're having in this country. As we know, there's not enough money to have enough legal aid lawyers. Courts are getting flooded with people that need a court decision but cannot afford to hire a lawyer. Legal aid groups are losing attorneys, and it's just a whole mess out there. So that's what I'm going to look at. Law Help Interactive is basically a software as a service type concept. It helps people who don't have lawyers do an interview, not sit with a package of forms and look at the form, but do more of a guided interview that is written in plain language, like we said. Both Heather and Robert talked about plain language, making it really easy to understand. Complete a legal form that they may need for a particular case. It could be a letter to a landlord to get a security deposit back or request some repairs to document eventually in a non-payment case or a small claims case, or it could be a divorce package for no kids, no house, no federal pension kind of thing. The benefit of using online document assembly, and you may be wondering what is that, is similar to TurboTax. In the legal context, there are a couple groups that do this. One of them is Easy Legal File in California. It's one of the online document assembly products out there. The other one is ICANN. I don't know if you all remember, ICANN became very popular in the 90s, created by the Orange County Legal Aid Society, and now Law Help Interactive. Basically, there's a lot of people out there, and for some reason, this is not showing. This was a chart showing you the impact that cuts in courts is having on the people that are in court without lawyers and on judges. I think I'm gonna kind of go off. If you go to any filing room clerk in most urban areas, you're gonna see a line like this of people going into the clerk to ask, I need to get a divorce, what do I need to do? In Los Angeles County, they have a self-help center in downtown. They serve about 300 people a day that are coming in, people without lawyers that need help, either understanding the process or completing their own forms. The problem is that if people are doing this by themselves without the use of technology and technology that guides them and educates them in the process, is that they write things in hand. This is very hard for the clerk to read. This is very hard for the judge to read. It may not be complete. It may be missing pages. It may be missing boxes. You know, we know that the boxes are this small in the legal forms. With technology, you can create forms that are complete, that include all the relevant documents, that are legible, and that follow the required format. So there's a lot of benefits in using online forms because not only are they legible and complete, but in the process, the litigant is being educated about what they're doing and why they're doing it and what the definitions are. And at the same time, the judges are getting better information. They're making better decisions. The orders are more complete. Overall, people are finding a savings of time of somewhere around 45% to 60% of time saved in using the automated forms. And about 80% of the people using the forms tend to be low-income people and with low literacy. So these are some of the statistics on that. So what is Law Help Interactive and how does it work? And I was going to do a demo, but I decided I didn't have time because I want to leave time for questions. Basically, if you see here on the screen, you have these two little people. That is basically a guided interview. That is what the litigant without a lawyer sees. You have a person talking to another person with a lot of white space, which is really nice for people who don't want to read a lot, that just ask you very simple questions. And as you move along this path, you eventually end up in the courthouse. At the very end, there's a building, and you can see that you're going by process, and you have pop-up bubbles. You may have a voiceover. You can have this right now in Spanish. So like New York courts, for example, is making instructions for child modification in Spanish. Language access is a big issue in courts. So the interviewee is just doing an interview that's very friendly. On the back end, we're using hot dogs technology, which was donated by LexisNexis a long time ago and continues to be donated by the Hot Dogs Corporation, which bought the product. And that's doing the heavy lifting in terms of marking up documents that can be produced on RTF or PDF and takes the data that the interface takes and puts it into a template that then can be produced or printed or even emailed. So you have a table with fields and data, and basically Law Help Interactive brings these three pieces together to make it happen for the people that are representing themselves or for their lawyers who may be pro bono lawyers that don't practice poverty law. These are some of our statistics. We have served over 1 million interviews since we started managing this project in 2005. We have, last year, we assembled 217,000 interviews, which is about 700 to 900 documents that people produce by themselves, if you count weekends, which is really impressive. In Pennsylvania, there is a project that has been doing online document assembly with LHI. It's Northern Pennsylvania Legal Services. And they have a variety of interviews, including foreclosure interviews that they created for lawyers with VIP, and also some of the family divorce documents. And they served 8,100 of those, and about 3,600 of those were assembled. PLA, Philadelphia Legal Assistance, I met with them yesterday. They're building family law forms for CASAC, and they're going to put some self-represented forms also on the Pennsylvania Law Help website. So there's going to be more content in Pennsylvania, which means more people are going to get help with this. And in terms we track by area of code, we use the LSC NIMSI codes, and we can see what type of pleadings people are using. Family law, by and large, dwarfs it. It's about 2/3 of everything. It's family law, and that's because those are the dockets that have the most people without lawyers, or where most of the people that are practicing poverty law are. Where do people use these forms? We've been working really hard in teaching libraries, law libraries, what they can do when somebody comes with a legal question, how to find the interactive forms if they exist in the state. Self-help centers. In New York court, the clerks have terminals where the person can do their interview without having to look at a 20-page packet. At kiosks, at home, from work. Basically, the technology works anywhere that is online. On Monday, the Huffington Post did a little story about pro bono net in their divorce section, and it's a section that they call Giving Back to the Community, so we were excited to see that they highlighted the family law volume in Law Help Interactive in terms of serving people without lawyers. A little bit about web chat. Web chat works really well when you combine it with online websites and then forms, and we just started doing web chat on Law Help Interactive itself as an experiment. There are other applications of technology in the context of public interest law practice. I was just in Vancouver 2 weeks ago meeting with the law libraries in the whole Canada as a country, and with the public legal education people. In Canada, they are using similar technology, approaching public legal education very differently than we do in the United States. I think it's very good for us to look at how they approach legal information, because empowering people to represent themselves requires not only transferring knowledge, which is what we do very well in the United States, but it also deals with helping people know what attitudes and what skills they need to do to be effective advocates for themselves, and that deals with emotions and feelings, which in the legal world in the United States we don't ever deal. And I'm going to stop now. I don't remember the name of the little packet, but I took all the emails that we get, and it's a statistical way, it statistically weights every word, and from about 3 months ago, I took all those emails, and this is kind of the words that come up in the emails that we get when we get user feedback. and just some resources if you want to take them down, if you want to look a little bit more into this. So that's that.
So at this point, we'll open up the floor for questions either from the panelists, other panelists, or of course from the audience. And like the other panels, there's cards floating around if you want to send a question, or if you want to just ask a question, you can raise your hand and one of our runners will get a microphone over to you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So you guys all kind of touched on education and access to information and access to services and guidance and things like that. And I was just wondering if any of you had any ideas about how technology can be used kind of beyond that kind of access to information to shift power structures and things that kind of are why poverty exists in the first place.
I think actually any of the panelists would be good for that. I think they all work in that sort of expanding that sort of field. Does any of you have?
Sure. I mean, sort of anecdotally, but it's an example of the sort of things that happen by getting the technology back into the community and providing access to it to the whole family. In fact, it does shift things. We've had examples of very basically kids getting their parents access to wholesale grain prices on the commodities market. So when their parents are negotiating with the buyers, they really know what their leverage point is and how to access better pricing. The laptops, there's been application used to enable the laptops to access the RFID tags on cattle in Uruguay. And more than not, one of the more powerful examples we see are children and communities telling their own stories and documenting their own communities. And this has implications on traditional health practices, which quite often can be a dying trend, and people losing access to what the local agriculture is used for, what plants can be used for medicine, tracking changes in the environment, ground erosion. So the main thing I think is to make the technology accessible. Connected is better, but not retaining it in the classroom, but turning it over to the community.
I would agree with a lot of what you said, Robert. And I think the way I tend to think about it is that information actually is an important way to be able to help change some of those trends around, things that keep people in poverty. If you think about a smallholder farmer who's growing crops at a subsistence level, partly because their crops just aren't productive enough to have an excess that they can sell, or maybe they don't know enough about what it would take to diversify into other crops, or to provide inputs that would help their soil to be able to take additional crops. If you can provide that farmer with that basic information, you can connect that farmer to markets, to transportation. If you can connect them to a plant doctor through the phone or through a visit from one of these people that helps them to solve some sort of a disease that their crop is dealing with, you can slowly but surely increase that farmer's yields and then allow that farmer to actually start to earn an income so they're beyond a subsistence farmer. And then if you can do that for women farmers, that's even more powerful. One stat that we have found is that in Uganda, where a lot of this work is going on today, women perform about 80% of the on-farm labor in their families, but they don't actually retain a lot of those assets. Those are sort of in the name of the husband. So if you can start to provide the woman with an opportunity to have that information and that knowledge herself, to be able to increase the value that she contributes and the perceived value of what she contributes to the household, then that puts her in a stronger position. And then even better, if you can suddenly introduce new opportunities for her to earn a side income from using the mobile phone to provide information services in her community, she can then supplement the family's income. So I think you're pointing out a really important thing, which is that you're not necessarily going to change a lot of these cultural dynamics and some of these things that are, eons old in terms of perceptions about the role of women or about, land rights or some of these other issues. But by providing economic empowerment, I think you do start to tip the scales a little bit in that right direction.
And I think in the legal context, one of the things, if we think about court forms, and in a state like Pennsylvania, where every court has its own set of local forms and procedures, there's no uniform forms, and there's no plain language forms. In law, we've created these like very complicated castles that only lawyers can open the door. I'll give you an example from the state of Kentucky. In Kentucky, there were no uniform divorce forms. They believe they have 142 fiefdoms, which are run by 142 chief judges in each of the counties, and they were using different divorce forms in each of those counties, and there was no uniformity. They started doing online forms in legal aid in Louisville, Kentucky, and the chief judge there saw that that was a great improvement to his court. He changed the calendar. He actually allowed the legal aid to open a self-help center so that more people could go there and get final decisions on these relationships that they wanted to terminate. And eventually, the chief judge and the legal aid attorney that were doing these online forums basically drove to every single county in Kentucky, and the uniform form, there's going to be a uniform divorce form for the state of Kentucky, which is huge. That would have never happened if it had not been for the chief judge seeing, wow, this form is really nice, it's really complete, we have this template. Can I go and talk to the other judges? And by simplifying the form, you've made now divorce something that a lot of people who don't have complicated issues can do on their own, and that allows them to either get married, do other things with their life and move on. So it's not necessarily a direct connection, but it does lead to a creation of awareness that sometimes things are overly complicated and there's a lot of transaction cost. And if you can get together in partnerships with the judges and the lawyers, the pro bono firms, technology, sometimes you can reduce those barriers that were built because that's the way things were done and that's the way the statute was written, and that's the kind of judicial independence that has been granted. And so we created these very complex systems with very complex language that doesn't need to be like that anymore. So it's about simplifying and making things more accessible, either transactional cost, banking, money transfer issues, and learning.
I have a question about the self-help law documents. I actually used to work for a self-help law center in Montana, and we created a lot of these documents and copyrighted them, and a lot of our documents were poached and sold through things like LegalZoom and those online kind of, self-help law documents. So they would take our copyrighted materials and then sell them to people. And when I left there in 2009, they were kind of vaguely talking about a class action, and I was just wondering if anything has happened with that, or if you know of other states that are having similar problems.
What state were you in?
Montana.
They just recently filed a case. These are documents, these are not online documents. These are paper documents she's referring to. The law librarians, Judy Meadows et al., they did get pro bono counsel, and they just filed like a month ago to prevent people from poaching. I think it's important to make a distinction between paper packets and online packets. We haven't had to take action, though we are ready to take action. All of our documents are for use on non-pecuniary use. They can only be used by legal nonprofits or pro bono lawyers working with bona fide IOLTA recipient or state or city pro bono programs. And I monitor where the links are coming from. We haven't had to on our online document assembly, but I'm aware of the situation in Montana, and they filed. And if you look at there's a blog now that's called accesstojustice.net. They just recently posted the decision, and I have the pleadings if you want, because I was very excited to see that they finally got pro bono counsel to stop that. But, courts publish their uniform forms, and like California, the AOC has uniform forms for pretty much every area of law. It's up to those courts to make sure those laws are not getting poached. In New York, they have set up specific. They watermark the forms, and so they can see if a lawyer is putting a blue back. They can see that that was a form that may have been cannibalized by a for-profit attorney. But attorney generals can play a very important role in terms of working with the people that are putting out these forms for the public for non-pecuniary use. I think that's one of the things that they did in Montana. They work with the attorney general in the state. So government can also help, courts can help, and of course librarians, law librarians, or whoever is sharing the forms.
And we actually had two sort of related questions that dealt more with the hardware. When you guys are able to penetrate an area and you give these very advanced pieces of hardware to poor families, do you ever face problems with them either selling that piece of hardware for more immediate needs such as food or shelter? And second, in a different way, do you see in more authoritarian areas where you guys work, are there other maybe governmental actors or powerful non-governmental actors that come in and appropriate that hardware?
I'll start. I'd say in the work that we do with mobile phones, we don't actually give the phones away. We are building, in some cases, in the case of health, for example, we're building solutions that can be provided through existing phones that are in the hands of people already. So those might be SMS or voice services. So those aren't really advanced handsets. In the case of the work we're doing in Uganda, where the community knowledge workers are providing access to information to the farmers and collecting data on mobile survey-based forms, they are using Androids. And in that case, the reason that it's really not of interest to a community knowledge worker to go off and try to sell that phone is that this is actually their productive asset. This is their business now. In addition to being a smallholder farmer, they're earning about $20 a month in profit from providing that service in their community. So, when we go through the recruiting process, we actually are very careful to work through other agriculture organizations, NGOs, government entities, whatever, but there's criteria around what we're looking for, and one of the first is that they're a known and trustworthy person in their community and somebody that people would come to ask a question and trust that information. So in addition to the fact that it's a productive asset and they earn a living from it, they're also somebody who they're being looked to as somebody in their community that's trustworthy, and they know that that would actually harm their reputation in their community if they were to go and just, abuse the hardware or resell it or something. But that's really how we think about these questions, is thinking about how do you create a sustainable business model around it for not only that entrepreneur, the user of that technology, but also for the operation that's supporting that network of entrepreneurs.
So we haven't really seen the laptops being co-opted for anything more insidious than putting textbooks on it. What's actually been a concern has been the safety of the child walking around with a laptop worth a couple $100. And that's really when it comes down to the community, is making the community aware of the project and really having them embrace it. So typically what we find happening is there's a sort of defensive reaction at first, and then slowly as the community embraces the project, becomes aware that the only person that should be really walking around with a laptop in the street should be, shorter than 5 feet tall. So it becomes a community policing program, so there may be a lag between the time when the kids get the laptops at school and when they start taking them home. We've also installed security features in the laptop so that when they're used through distribution at a school, if the laptops don't come within the vicinity of the school server and sort of do a login for a period of 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever the local community wants to do, they'll brick. So we've been able to mitigate that kind of violence or theft or stuff like that. We've seen the most thefts actually when the laptops get left at school, because then you can break in and suddenly get 100 laptops all at once.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just had a quick anecdote. So one of our community knowledge workers in Uganda lost their phone a couple of weeks ago, and we had a report from our field officer saying that Edward Changalat in such and such province in Gulu town lost his handset. We have insurance on the phones, but we were concerned. And we heard 6 hours later that somebody in their community had found this phone and recognized it as a community knowledge worker's phone because it had a sticker on it. And they appreciated the value of that service that person was providing in their community, and they brought it to the local police person who returned it to the community knowledge worker. So hopefully you'll have some of that type of thing happen as well.
Do you want to, Robert, maybe show them what the XO laptop looks like? Because I know that if we saw somebody walking around with like a Toshiba laptop, you might not know, whether that person should have it. But these laptops are pretty distinctive, and I think that helps, or is at least one method to help sort of alleviate this kind of problem.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, if you see an adult holding these somewhere, don't get into community policing. But this is it, and it's distinct, and we like to think it's cool rather than cute. And it's meant to be a book, a laptop. It's light, it's robust. It's kind of high, but we usually, we throw them. We don't worry too much about it because kids are rough with stuff, right?
Yeah, so that's definitely one way that I think helps to alleviate that problem. Another question that I think can be generalized a little bit is each of you and your organization sort of act as an intermediary, and you have to deal with experts on one end. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how, for example, Claudia, you get the substantive law to plug into the documents, or get the apps to deal with that, or maybe get the software to deal with the education process. So maybe we can go this way.
Okay. I think that in the context of online legal forms, and letting each community create its own documents, because at the end it's about the local rules. The transfer of expertise between an attorney who's been practicing 20 years and may really know how to structure an interview to get all the relevant and required legal information for a prima facie case, that transfer of knowledge of that to a template developer is probably one of the most challenging things. And this is why whenever a project is getting started, like Florida is just starting building online forms for the whole state of Florida, the first thing that we do is, because we very much believe in collaboration, is that we encourage that from the beginning, the substantive experts be part of the design of the grant, the testing, the outreach, and that it be done in a group. So the feedback between once a template is created and tested in the field, and the review of a substantive expert and the template developer, those three activities have to be tightly coordinated and managed so that there's no lags. So I think that that's a very good point in terms of taking expertise in another domain and then putting that expertise, making the technology tool, and then going out and testing it in the field. You really require strong project management skills, which we don't learn in law school, and sometimes people don't learn in computer science if you're in hardcore CS, you're not learning to become a product manager. So you do need to have some strength in that, the product management and moving the project along, bringing always the substantive expertise to validate what you're creating.
I would say for our work, once we've chosen a domain area, whether it's agriculture or health or another area, we start, first of all of our work happens on the ground. So the Seattle Green Technology Center is basically a few of us who are leading programs and a few staff members, support staff, and all the rest of the work happens in Uganda, in Ghana, in Indonesia, in Kenya. And so on the ground, we identify who are those experts in the domain that we want to work in. If it's in agriculture, who are the research organizations who are doing research on beans and on maize and on groundnuts and the different crops that are of interest to our farmers. And then we go and spend time with those organizations as well as with the agriculture development organizations and find out what's the content that you're trying to get out to the farmers that they don't have. Then we go and we talk to the farmers and we say, what are the information gaps? What do you need to know that you don't know today? What information are you wishing you had more of? And by putting together the knowledge about what the gaps are with what the expert information is they're trying to get out there, we perform that intermediary role to basically take that expert information and package it into very simple language that can be disseminated through a mobile phone in a couple of screens. And we have what's called an expert review board that's basically researchers and scientists that look over our tips that we've generated from that expert content to make sure that we've retained the accuracy of the information, but that we're conveying it in a very simple way that somebody with a limited level of literacy or maybe not a great understanding of English would be able to understand. And then the community knowledge worker is the person that in the community reads enough English that they can translate that tip into the local village language where they live. So that's kind of how we do that kind of process of providing that intermediary service between the expert and the end recipient of the information.
I mean, Heather's right, and I think she captures the essential dynamics of the situation quite accurately. I think the software community really gets the projects, particularly the open source community that OLPC works closely with, and we've worked really closely with them to create an open platform so that content and applications can easily be developed for the XO, but by extension, almost any open source operating software. I think the people that aren't getting it, and they haven't learned a lesson from the music industry, are publishers. And particularly when it comes to textbooks and children's content, sometimes the publishers don't even think about getting access to digital versions of the books, and that creates an obstacle for OLPC. And in fact, the way publishers of textbooks in the developing world are sort of treating the rights over the materials is less than generous.
So another question had to do with open source software and open source development in general, and I think Robert's organization deals with that really directly. Does either of your organizations, what is the role of the open source community for you guys?
So Hot Dogs is proprietary software that is owned by the Hot Dogs Corporation. They have donated to us and to Legal Aid the licenses that have restrictions, like, for example, it's all civil law practice. There's no criminal law practice. It's all for non-pecuniary use, etc. In Law Help Interactive, because it's funded by the Legal Services Corporation Technology Initiative grants, all of those grants have grant assurances, and the grant assurances require that anything that is developed by a legal aid group using our technology will be shared with any other legal aid group, any other legal nonprofit. So in Law Help Interactive, we have 2,300 online interviews right now that are active. Anyone in any state that is in that platform recognized as an employee of a legitimate legal aid group can access any of those templates, take it and modify it for their local law and replicate it. So we have what we call a contributor portal, which is one of the neat things I think about my project, because it's very much a sharing community. Where people can once they post the content, they agree to share it with anybody else in a legal nonprofit that is an IOLTA-funded one. So we support and maintain that, and we promote and distribute the best practices. We have a listserv where people can ask, I'm having a question with the jurisdictional questions of the child. I have these repeats, how do I do it? People are constantly sharing. It's in a lot of ways a very co-op based. There's a very active community that's developing these forums, helping each other, and we have monthly calls where people get together. We talk about issues where they may need more support and training, and we do a lot of support and nurturing this community that just keeps growing, and the templates are available to everyone. So it's under license from an owner corporation that has been very generous in granting those licenses for us, and I think that's another role that attorneys can play, where if you're working in firms or you have relationships with people who own technology like that, to kind of help in bring and discuss brokering of these licenses to distribute to legal aid, or even, not necessarily just legal nonprofits, but any other sort of nonprofits. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a relationship to get these products like Hot Dogs, or in the case of A2J Author, which was created in Chicago, Kent, and financed by the State Justice Institute, to get these products, create these licenses that then can be shared with other people doing similar goals, similar work. And across the nonprofit sector, there's really no group that I know of that is really looking at doing the product transfer within the nonprofit sector. And that's a role that lawyers and law schools like Penn could really facilitate, because a lot of attorneys are working with these technology companies.
I would say in our work there's two questions. One is about open source and open platform technology, and then the other is just about IP. When we go into any type of new project or program, we often partner with technology companies. Like in Uganda, we partnered with Google initially for our first SMS-based mobile search application where you could look up information on health or agriculture. In Indonesia, we work with Qualcomm. And the way we negotiate those IP agreements is we say that, look, anything that's generated as part of this initiative together it basically becomes either joint IP, but it usually Grameen Foundation retains the IP. and we will be able to use it going forward for all of our charitable work. And the entity itself, Qualcomm or whoever, can also use it, but for charitable purposes only. So they can't charge for it. They can, take basically derivative works and they can go do work with that commercially, but they can't actually use what we create together. So I think that's the starting point. But what we're really trying to do is actually, through these kind of collaborative hybrid models, we're trying to prove the hypothesis that you can actually build products and services that actually serve the poor in a meaningful way that have a sustainable business model behind them. So over time, if we can actually show, for example, the mobile money sort of ecosystem, the banks, the telcos, the other entities that are wanting to play in this space, how to build better products and services that meet the needs of the poor specifically, and they can do it in a way where the business model works so the poor can actually access those services, we'd actually be okay if they go off and build things based on our innovations. The funding that we take from donors is really risk capital to try to go prove to the market that you can serve the poor in a sustainable way. So while the IP piece is important up front and we want to make sure that our innovations can continue to be offered in a charitable way, we are actually trying to inspire private sector as well to serve the poor more effectively. And then to the point of open source and open platform, our work in Uganda is working on the Android platform, and so that's open source, and our intent is to put all of our stuff out there in the public domain for others to use. We haven't really had time to get to that yet, but that's where we're headed eventually, is to have that all available for others to be able to use those applications and services as well.
I've been reading from cards for a while. Is there anybody in the audience that...
Testing. All right. Let's say hypothetically I'm a law student who has an undergraduate degree in computer science and who worked as a software developer. And let's say hypothetically also that there's nothing I'd rather do as a career than to create these like technological solutions that would benefit public welfare. Are there any organizations or groups that I could help out with, maybe just as a volunteer right now? Or should I be, okay. Or, I'm starting a project with someone from the design school at Penn on my own, so that's something that's going to be built from scratch. But I wanted to ask if there are any organizations that I could help out with on a volunteer basis.
I mean, in addition to just my own organization, we've got a program called, it's called Bankers Without Borders, because we started out as a microfinance-related entity, but we actually work with people who have technology backgrounds, business backgrounds as well. But in addition to ours, there's actually a really interesting ICT for Development program at Berkeley University, and they have a mailing list called TIER, T-I-E-R, and I can connect you with it later. But they post opportunities all the time for people to do internships and volunteer work and things like that, right at this intersection of technology and development. So there's a lot of opportunities out there.
I mean, you can also check out the Mozilla Foundation, FSF, the Free Software Foundation. They're located in Boston. I think they're running a conference later this month. OLPC actually does a legal internship program in its Cambridge office. We've been running that through Northeastern, but there's no exclusivity there. So hypothetically, you should contact those people.
Yeah, and there's many, in the legal aid context, there are many opportunities. The question is, where do you hypothetically want to end up, like in what state? And because different legal aid communities are organized in different ways and are using different technologies. But I think that we are just starting, at least in legal aid in the United States, we are just starting to really understand how technology can really change the dynamics and open the doors to the courthouse and to access to justice type issues. So couple places that are looking at technology and just started to look at issues of self-represented is the Berkman Center at Harvard, has a technology institute, and we're just starting to work with them on self-help issues. Vermont Law School also has professors that are interested in the issue. Kent Law University, you can read what Ron Stout is writing on this issue of technology and how it's totally transforming legal aid and access to justice for the poor. So there are people, and then of course you can reach out to us at Pro Bono Net, because part of what we do is use technology to foster pro bono. And there may be opportunities in New York or in some of the other states. There may be opportunities with the ABA, which also has a lot of stuff going on with, virtual lawyering and all kinds of things, but also public interest things. One of the most interesting things to me right now is on the language access front, is really monitoring how language interpretation and translation technology is changing so rapidly, fast, and becoming a lot cheaper to produce tools in other languages. And you just need to look at the census and realize that we're 20 years behind in where we need to be as a society in terms of non-discrimination for national origin, and really thinking about how do we take what the large language translation companies are doing for the corporate world, because the corporate world is global. How do we do that and bring that to legal aid? There's a lot of challenges out there, and I think it's just a matter of, being proactive and getting connected and doing exactly the right thing, which is being here and asking the questions. So reach out and, contact any of us, and we can connect you or introduce you to other people.
I think, yeah.
I was wondering if there is anything happening in terms of developing technology that would help people access forms of dispute resolution other than courts, arbitration and mediation, or maybe things that I wouldn't have even thought of in other countries and cultures, but would actually sort of get away from the most expensive place to resolve disputes, and often the most problematic, which is courts, into things that would be easier for people to access and sort of submit problems and somehow get help in resolving them. Not really thinking of, Watson at the other end solving the dispute for you so much as a human being, but an easier way to get access to a human.
That's an excellent question. If we look at the other English countries, which is where our law also comes from, Australia actually, the government in Australia is developing virtual arbitration software and rooms, and actually they were testing it about 2 years ago. Our online forms are not right now, arbitration and mediation and more problem-solving type courts, we're not there yet, but I hope we will be. But, the concept of having a procedurally fair virtual arbitration rule where the poor and the low literacy and the vulnerable communities are at an equal level field with the other party. People are starting to think about it. I've been at conferences where the ABA has been kind of posing this hypothetical. Could we build this? What would the rules of engagement be? So there is some inkling of thought of that, and how do we bring technology to create and level the playing field between parties and set a process that is fair and transparent for everyone, so that the person without money is in an equal position as the person with money that has the lawyer. But Australia is probably, and I could connect you with my contact in Australia, because he was just here about 2 years ago visiting with us and going through other places in the US. And he told me that they do have some sort of virtual mediation setup that they were testing to see if that would make sense in Australia, which I think is really fascinating, but that is not happening. As far as I know, I haven't seen or heard of anybody develop a virtual mediation. There will be eventually a 3D experiential, we're going there with chips and technology and graphics we will eventually have virtual courts, but I don't think that there's a prototype yet. But there will be, and hopefully, who knows, 5 years, 10 years from now, we're gonna be doing remote hearings or meetings.
Sorry, Claudia. I think what has to be the last question before we wrap up, do you see your organizations having a role, or organizations like yours, in an area that is technologically and legally saturated like Philadelphia, because a lot of people in this room are sort of locally focused, in a place where there already is a lot of legal service and already is a lot of technology?
Is that a question for all of us?
Yeah, I think for everybody, because
Well, I think that there is a lot of innovation going on, at least on the the online forms that we support are very, very flexible, and it's a very, like Heather said, you look at what's the local need, and then you create a program. I think that at the end, it's not as much about the technology as to the delivery of legal services, and there's still a lot of things that need to be explored and that could be supported with technology. I think that Philadelphia has a lot of really good models, but I don't know how connected they are with the whole technology initiative community that LSC has been leading for the past 10, 11 years. There's all other kinds of technology other than online forms, and different legal aid groups are experimenting with other technologies. And so I think it's really important to kind of keep up with what's happening at the Equal Justice Conference. Right now, the self-represented issue has become a big deal, but there's also a civil Gideon issue going on in the national discussion. I think legal communities like Philadelphia, where there's such a vast level of expertise and legal knowledge and litigation and federal court litigation, if they connect more with the technology groups in other states where they don't have as many resources, there could be a lot of synergy, and it would be really exciting to see more of a Philadelphia presence in that other community, because they're very creative because they don't have as many resources.
And I would say, maybe not to address the legal aspect, but just sort of what organizations like mine could be doing to better connect the poor with information they need to try to be empowered. My organization focuses primarily on countries that have very large populations of people who live under $2.50 a day. So I think the US is probably not going to be a focus for us in the near term. But I could see other organizations sitting down and saying, what are some of the gaps in information that the poor in Philadelphia have around health, for example? There's a service called Text for Baby that's similar to what we're doing in Ghana that allows pregnant women to sign up for SMS reminders, and based on where they are in their pregnancy, it reminds them to go to their clinic or to take their folic acid or to do different things to not drink alcohol or whatever it might be. That's a simple example, but I think about the interesting program earlier that was talking about teaching people who are incarcerated how to be gardeners, for example. If there were all these types of information services that people could sign up for to learn basic skills through their phones, since so many more people in the US have phones, even poor people, and sometimes have smartphones, there's a lot of information that people can actually get that could be meaningful to helping them to improve their situation. So I think there's definitely an opportunity there.
I think technology, providing each child with a tablet, a laptop, can transform education in any community. If you look at the fractional cost that it would represent over what is probably an expense of somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 per student in the Philadelphia school system, I think it's something that needs to be thought about, and it can be done in a way that actually empowers teachers, that makes the classroom environment more dynamic, allows learning to happen after the school day ends, and doesn't have to, be overly stressful. I think it stands to empower the community, to extend the reach of e-government and information and tools like Heather and Claudia's organizations are both promoting. So, I'm not trying to suggest that technology and laptops or a silver bullet, but they're definitely a powerful tool, and it's a new tool. And I think the sooner we start thinking about how to enable them and how to make them accessible to people in our communities, the better off we can start thinking about how to bring stability and improve economic development.
And if I can just say, it's about practicing law with the tools of today and being more effective and efficient as public interest lawyers. And for example, I don't know of any LSC program that is using SMS technology to do similar to Text Baby for their legal aid clients, remind them of their next appointment, check in whether they filed or not, checked in whether they served the other party or not. I mean, a lot of resources get spent giving clients or people that you're helping in a clinic situation, but there's really very little care or post-appointment care and management. What happens is the person comes to your next appointment completely unprepared, and there goes an hour of a valuable public interest lawyer's time. How many is it? 1 out of 8 one public interest lawyer for 8,000, I don't remember what the statistic is, but it's 8,000, 16,000. 1 hour of those is wasted. And if legal aid was using these text technologies, which low-income communities already come, and immigrants know texting because of the chart that Heather showed, the distribution of mobile phones across the world. If legal aid groups were benefiting from what already is happening in healthcare, and we're implementing some of these tools to care of their clients, there would be less hours wasted, there would be more clients served, there would be less meetings missed, there would be less hearings rescheduled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot that could be done to bring some of this technology, which is proven and cheap, and even free to the clients, to improve how we practice law and how we take care of them, considering that with 40% IOLTA cuts, there's less of us. So.
Very good point.
On that note, I'd like to personally thank the panelists on behalf of PIN for making time out of your schedules to come out here and talk to us.